It was the last thing she ever expected. The phone call came in the middle of an ordinary Thursday morning, while Emma was just finishing her coffee and scrolling through the mundane noise of social media. She'd been having a rough week. Her job felt suffocating, her friends were distant, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something in her life was slipping through her fingers. But nothing could have prepared her for what the voice on the other end of the line said. "Emma, you don't know me, but your life is in danger." She froze, fingers tight around the ceramic cup, eyes wide with confusion. The stranger spoke with a cold calmness, as though they were reciting a well-known fact. "There's a man outside your apartment building. He's been watching you for days, and if you don't leave now, it's going to get worse." Panic surged through her chest, her heart racing as she scrambled to respond, but the voice hung up abruptly, leaving her with nothing but a ringing silence. Confused, terrified, and utterly disoriented, Emma's mind spun as she glanced out the window. The gray, rainy morning offered little comfort. The world outside looked the same, yet she was suddenly aware of how fragile it all seemed. She had no idea who this person was, why they had reached out, or whether they were even telling the truth. And yet, something in the tone of their voice, something in the gravity of the words, compelled her to move. Without another thought, she grabbed her bag, locked her door, and ran out into the street, not knowing where she was heading, only knowing she had to get away from her apartment. She'd barely made it 2 blocks before she found herself standing in front of a small bookstore that she passed by almost every day but never had the time to enter. The rain was pouring down and the air smelled thick with the kind of humidity that weighed on your chest. But inside, through the fogged-up windows, she saw someone, a woman, hunched over a stack of books, the kind of person you could easily forget if you didn't look closely. Emma didn't know why, but she stepped inside. It wasn't a conscious decision. The doorbell chimed as she entered, and the warm air of the bookstore immediately enveloped her, providing a stark contrast to the chill that had taken over her body. The woman behind the counter looked up, her eyes dark and intense. She was striking in a way Emma couldn't put into words. Something about her presence felt grounded, almost magnetic. The woman gave a small, knowing smile, one that didn't need words to express an unspoken understanding. It was like she had been waiting for Emma. Without a word, Emma walked up to her, and as if by instinct, the woman handed her a book, a small, leather-bound journal. "Take it," the woman said softly. "You need it. You can't outrun what's coming, but maybe this can help you understand." Emma felt her hands tremble as she accepted the book. The cover was blank, the pages inside empty. "Who are you?" she asked, but the woman only shook her head as if the answer was irrelevant. All Emma knew was that she had just stepped into something far bigger than she could ever have imagined. The first step had been taken, but what would the next one lead to? The strange encounter left Emma in a daze as she stumbled back out into the downpour, clutching the book like a lifeline. What had just happened? Who was that woman, and what was this book supposed to mean? The weight of the situation settled heavily in her chest. She barely even noticed that the rain had stopped as she walked, the streets now eerily quiet. She could almost hear her heartbeat echoing through the silence as she tried to make sense of everything. The phone call, the warning, the woman in the bookstore. But one thing kept nagging at her. She had felt something when she was in the woman's presence. A strange pull, a flicker of something deep within her. Something she couldn't quite explain but couldn't ignore. That night, as she sat in her small apartment, staring at the empty pages of the journal, the phone rang again. This time the voice was different, rougher, more familiar. "You need to go back," the voice said, and Emma felt her blood run cold. "The woman at the bookstore, she's not who you think she is." Emma's stomach flipped. Her mind raced back to the bookstore, the eyes of the woman who had handed her the journal. She had seemed so unassuming, so normal. But now, with every passing second, Emma felt as though a layer of mystery had been peeled away, and what lay beneath was terrifyingly unknown. The voice on the other end of the line urged her to meet the woman again. "You don't understand yet, but you will," it said before hanging up. Emma sat in silence, staring at the phone in disbelief. What the hell was happening? Why had she been thrust into this web of danger and intrigue? And most importantly, who was the woman in the bookstore really? Compelled by something she couldn't explain, Emma found herself returning to the bookstore the next day as if some invisible force was guiding her. The bell chimed as she entered, the same warmth enveloping her. But this time, the woman was not behind the counter. Instead, a different woman stood in her place, a woman whose eyes were sharp and knowing, her presence almost unsettling. "You've come for answers, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low and calm. Emma nodded, her throat tight. "Where's the woman who was here yesterday?" The new woman smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. "She's not who you think she is. Neither are you." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Neither are you. What did that mean? Before Emma could ask more, the woman handed her a folded note. "You need to know this before it's too late," she said, her eyes darkening with an intensity Emma couldn't ignore. As she unfolded the paper, her heart dropped. Written on it were the words, "She's the one who's been watching you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. What? No, that couldn't be possible. The woman who had handed her the journal, the one who seemed so kind, so unassuming, was the one behind it all, the one who had been watching her. A new layer of fear gripped Emma as the weight of the situation crushed her. She wanted to run, to scream, to escape. But something deeper inside her, something she hadn't fully acknowledged yet, told her she couldn't walk away from this. She was too far in. And then, in the distance, she saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was the woman from the bookstore, the one who had given her the journal. She was staring right at Emma, but this time there was no smile, no warmth, just cold, calculating eyes that seemed to know everything about her. Emma took a step forward, and in that moment she knew this wasn't just about danger anymore. It was about something far more complex. Something she couldn't understand but had already begun to feel. The woman in front of her wasn't just part of this mystery. She was the mystery. And Emma's heart began to race again, not with fear, but with something entirely different, a desire, a pull, an undeniable connection that scared her even more than the truth. The woman in the doorway didn't move, but her presence felt like it was suffocating Emma, drawing her in despite the rising panic that clawed at her insides. Emma's mind was a blur, racing through 1,000 questions, none of which seemed to have answers. Her legs felt like they were made of lead as she took another step toward her, but the woman didn't speak. Instead, she simply stared at Emma, her eyes piercing through the veil of confusion that clouded her mind. Emma could feel the weight of the book in her hand as though it were a key to something, something buried beneath layers of uncertainty and fear. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, and just as Emma opened her mouth to speak, the woman finally broke it with a single, chilling word. "Leave." The command was so simple, yet it stopped Emma dead in her tracks. Leave. Was she supposed to just walk away from this, from everything that had been happening to her? She had been pulled into this whirlwind, but now it seemed like the woman was telling her to run, to escape while she still could. But there was something in her tone, something in the way her eyes burned into Emma's, that made her hesitate. "Leave." The words didn't sit right, and before she could question it further, the woman took a step forward. "I can protect you, but only if you trust me," she said softly, her voice low and almost coaxing. The warmth from before returned, but this time it wasn't comforting. It was dangerous. "You're part of something bigger than you realize, Emma, and it's too late to back out now." A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine as the woman's words sank in. She wanted to run, to scream, to deny every moment of this growing connection that felt more like a trap than a chance at understanding. But there was something undeniable in the woman's presence, something magnetic that refused to be ignored. The pull between them was like a storm, fierce and unstoppable. Emma felt it deep in her chest, a longing, a desire that felt both foreign and familiar all at once. It wasn't just about the mystery anymore. It wasn't even just about the danger. It was about the woman herself. "Who are you?" Emma's mind screamed, but the words wouldn't leave her lips. The woman took another step closer, her gaze never leaving Emma's face. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air thick with the unsaid. "I can't tell you everything," she murmured, her voice suddenly softer, almost tender. "But I can show you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Show her what? Before she could protest, the woman reached out and gently took Emma's hand, her touch sending an unexpected jolt of electricity through Emma's body. It was as if the woman's very presence had unlocked something inside her, a desire, a hunger she hadn't realized she was capable of feeling. And as their eyes met, Emma knew, deep down, that everything she had ever known, everything she thought was real, was about to shatter. The woman was no longer a stranger. She was something else entirely, and Emma's heart began to race for reasons she didn't fully understand. With a swift motion, the woman pulled Emma closer, her lips just inches from her ear. "I'm not the enemy, Emma, but I can't protect you if you don't let me in." The words stung like a confession, a promise, a warning. Emma felt her chest tighten as everything around her seemed to fade into the background. The bookstore, the mysterious woman, the rain-soaked world outside, all of it disappearing, leaving only the two of them in a world that was rapidly changing, shifting under their feet. Emma's thoughts were a mess, a hurricane of emotions, but through it all, one truth burned through with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just a danger anymore. This was something else, something neither of them could escape. Emma's pulse hammered in her throat as the woman's words wrapped around her like a vice. "I can't protect you if you don't let me in." She wanted to push away, to break free, to run back to the safety of her life, the life before all of this madness had consumed her. But as the woman's presence pressed closer, Emma realized that the feeling she was fighting wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, something more primal, a connection that had been growing ever since she first walked into that bookstore. A connection that couldn't be undone, no matter how much she tried to deny it. The woman's eyes burned into hers, not with malice, but with an intensity that made it impossible for Emma to look away. "What is this?" Emma thought, her mind struggling to make sense of the pull between them. The mystery had become something far more complicated, and for the first time, Emma understood this wasn't just about danger. This was about them. Without realizing it, Emma's fingers curled around the woman's hand, the touch warm and electric. It was as if the woman was offering her a choice she had never truly had. "Trust me," her touch seemed to say. Emma's breath hitched in her throat, her heart racing as she fought the urge to step back, to run away from what was happening. But the more she resisted, the more the pull intensified. It was as if this moment, this connection, was always meant to happen. The woman's lips parted slightly, as though she were about to say something more, but before she could, the sound of a crash echoed through the bookstore, slicing through the air like a blade. Emma jumped, her body jolting as the noise shattered the fragile bubble of intimacy that had formed between them. The woman's gaze never left her. "You're not safe here anymore," she whispered urgently, her hand tightening around Emma's. The words sent a chill down Emma's spine, but she didn't have time to process them. The woman pulled her into a dark corner of the bookstore, her movements swift and practiced, as though this had all been rehearsed. "We need to go now." The urgency in her voice snapped Emma into action. She was still reeling from the shock of everything, the strange connection, the book, the phone calls. But the fear in the woman's eyes was undeniable. There was no time for questions. The world outside was suddenly far too real, and the storm inside the bookstore wasn't the only one she needed to worry about. As they bolted through the back door of the bookstore and into an alley, Emma's heart raced with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. What the hell is happening? She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words caught in her throat. The woman was already moving, pulling Emma along as though they were both being hunted. The air felt thick with danger, the streets now alive with an energy that Emma couldn't understand. The woman's grip on her hand was unshakable, and as they turned a corner, Emma could see the first flickers of movement in the distance, shadows moving too quickly, too deliberately. Emma's breath caught in her chest. "Who's after us?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman glanced back, her face taut with determination. "It's not about who's after us," she said, her voice low but fierce. "It's about what's coming for you." Emma stopped dead in her tracks. What did that mean? What could be coming for her that she couldn't escape? Before she could voice another question, the woman turned to her, her face filled with a kind of grim resolve. "We don't have much time. They'll be here soon, and you won't survive unless you trust me, unless you finally see what I've been trying to show you." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality, and for the first time, Emma understood. This was bigger than she could have ever imagined. The danger, the fear, it wasn't just about her life anymore. It was about them, about what was starting to awaken between them. And as the first flash of headlights sliced through the alleyway, Emma's heart leapt into her throat. There was no going back. Whatever was coming, whatever was about to change, it had already begun. The journey they had started together was only just beginning, and neither of them knew where it would lead. The headlights grew brighter, their glow cutting through the mist of the alley like a blade, illuminating everything in their path. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps as the woman yanked her forward, urgency radiating from every muscle in her body. The cold rush of night air stung Emma's skin, but the chill didn't come from the outside world. It came from deep within her, as though her entire being had been plunged into unknown territory. The woman was pulling her faster now, her grip unyielding. "This way," she muttered, and Emma could hear the raw panic in her voice. The world seemed to warp around them, the distant sounds of footsteps, shouts, and tires screeching growing louder. They were being hunted. Emma's chest tightened at the realization, but something deeper inside her flickered with defiance, an inkling of the truth that had been building with every moment of this strange, inexplicable journey. They turned a corner, the shadows of the alley swallowing them whole. But Emma knew in the pit of her stomach that they were cornered. The woman's face was set, her jaw clenched, and there was no sign of hesitation. Whatever it was that had been chasing them, whatever danger was closing in, it hadn't caught up to them yet. But Emma could feel it now. The pull, the tension. The truth that had been simmering beneath the surface was no longer just a feeling, it was a revelation. This wasn't just about danger. It wasn't just about surviving. Emma turned her head, meeting the woman's eyes for the first time since they'd run. In those eyes she saw a reflection of herself, lost but resolute. The woman's lips parted, a quiet whisper barely escaping her mouth. "I never wanted you to find out like this." But it's too late now. Emma's mind reeled. Find out what? The question screamed in her mind, but the woman didn't answer. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder one last time, and her expression darkened. They had been wrong about one thing. The headlights weren't coming from a car. They were coming from a group of people moving swiftly, purposefully. No, not people, hunters. Emma felt the blood drain from her face as the realization hit her with the force of a crashing wave. These weren't ordinary pursuers. They weren't after the woman, they were after her. A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine as her pulse quickened. How could they know? The woman squeezed her hand, pulling her forward with a renewed urgency. "They don't know yet," she said, her voice tight, "but they will, and when they do, it's over." Emma's head spun as she tried to keep up, her legs starting to falter beneath her. But the woman wouldn't let go. She couldn't afford to. Not now. The world around them had shifted, and everything that had felt like a random series of events now felt like fate, interwoven, inescapable. The woman led Emma to an old, hidden door at the far end of the alley, its entrance almost invisible against the backdrop of crumbling brick. As the woman fumbled with the keys, Emma's thoughts spiraled. What do they want with me? Why me? There was a deep sense of urgency in the woman's every movement, as though they were out of time. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway beyond. "Inside," the woman ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos. Emma hesitated, her feet planted firmly in place. She wasn't sure if she was ready to cross this line, to leave everything she knew behind. But the truth was undeniable now. The moment the woman had touched her hand, everything had changed. There was no going back. As they stepped inside, Emma felt a shift, like she was stepping into another world, one that was hidden beneath the surface of the one she knew. The woman's face softened as she closed the door behind them, and Emma saw something there that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just the steely resolve or the fear that had clouded her expression. There was something else, something softer, something that Emma had only just begun to understand. The woman turned to her, their eyes locking again, and for the first time, Emma realized the truth. The danger, the chase, the book, the phone calls, it was all part of a bigger picture, a puzzle that only the two of them could solve together. The woman wasn't just trying to protect her, she was trying to help her remember who Emma was, what Emma was. And suddenly, in that dim hallway, as the distant sounds of pursuit grew fainter, Emma felt it. The weight of 1,000 secrets, 1,000 lifetimes. And she knew in her bones that this was just the beginning of a journey neither of them could deny.